But let's go into some history right now about Rufus Pudens Frudensis. Well, it turns out that his half-brother Paul was sent first to the Isles. That's over there in England and Scotland and Ireland. He didn't go over to all these other churches first. He actually went to the Isles first. And could his mission have been to hunt down the Joseph and the three Marys? I suggest it was. Because if you read his accounts of when he was in England, he was totally and completely rebuffed. They didn't want anything to do with him. They knew he was a bad guy. Old Paul, who, changed his name from Saul, supposedly, but his real name in the New Testament was Malchus, Malcus. And all of the hereditary new rulers of the Pharisee, Sadducee religion, their names had to start with M-A-L, M-I-L, or M-E-L. It was a requirement. So his name was Malchus. So anyway, Malchus, Saul, comes back to the Emperor Claudius, and he says, hey, these guys won't talk to me. I can't find the Joseph and the three Marys. So Rome decides to go to war with England. It wasn't called England, man. And we have to remember for a few hundred years prior to this time frame, Rome peaceably traded with England. They didn't have anything. They had some tin, some shale, some hides. They didn't have anything worth fighting for. But they decided to get into a fight. Well, of course, the old English king named Caracas, he lost. And so Caracas was brought back to Rome. Now, you have to understand, throughout the history of Rome, whenever Rome conquered some dictator or king or emperor, ruler of another land, they brought him back to Rome. They put him in a cage. They marched him. They dragged the cage down the street, rolled the cage down the street. People threw garbage and feces and all kinds of bad things on this guy while he's in this cage. And then they brought the guy out in front of the emperor, and then they tortured him to death until he swore allegiance to the Roman Caesar. And then they killed him. Well, what'd they do with old King Caracas? They brought his whole family back over there, and they built the Palladium, sometimes called the Presidium Britannica. Now, this building was of such size, it took 400 house servants. 400 house servants. And this is where King Caracas was required to spend 7 years in exile. And he had to take this oath that he would never raise arms against Rome and that he would always be subservient, he and England, to Rome. Now, it gets even better than that. His number one daughter married the commander, the chief general of all the Roman legions, because you got to have some political marriage. And then his son married another hierarchy, one of the aristocracy ladies of Rome, because, when you marry your children. Come on back after this break, and I hope you all will pay attention to our sponsors, because this is how Republic Broadcasting stays on the air. Thank you. Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the Gathering Offering, and my name is Jerry Kirk, and we are discussing something that is actually known as the false prophet. And the false prophet is mentioned into the book of Revelation, and most people say, oh, there's lots of false prophets. No, I'm talking about the false prophet, because everybody wants to refer to Antichrist in a singular thing, and yet Antichrist never occurs in Scriptures in this singular fashion. It says there are many Antichrists. There is only one false prophet, singular. Okay? Now, so anyway, we have this deal here that Caracas, he goes into exile in the Palladium or Presidium Britannica, which was of such size, it took 400 house servants. And guess what? It was all all of the building of the Universal Church, called now the Catholic Church. Universal Catholic Church, UCC, Uniform Commercial Code, you might think of. And it was all of the buildings of this Catholic Church up until the time of Constantine. So they have these arranged marriages. And the first daughter marries the general of the Roman legion. But the second daughter of Caracas became a favorite of the Emperor Claudius, and he renamed her Claudia. Well, guess what? Claudia married Rufus Pudens Verdensis. And I have now just given you the seed line of the kings and queens of England. And you may trace back that seed line all the way back to Rufus, whose mother was the daughter of the high priest of the Pharisee Sadducee religion, a Canaanite. So, you want to know why we're in trouble? Because we got Canaanite king, and we have Canaanite treaties with those Canaanites. Now, some people say, oh, he's making all this up. Well, I'm going to tell you one of the sources that you can find some information from. And I like to get information from people that are pro on a subject. They are heavily committed to that subject, and they don't even know what they're finding in their research. And the book you can go find is called The Lost Chapter of Acts of the Apostles, with commentary by E. Raymond Capt, C-A-P-T. And you can read his book, and you can find out about Caracas and the Palladium Britannica and these marriages. And, you got to read it a little bit and say, with a little bit of, wow, how in the world could Paul be a good guy if his family was the moneyed of Rome? Don't we have problems with the Rothschilds and Rockefellers and all the moneyed people right now? Got to think about that. Well, let's continue on a little bit from, Mr. Paul in the book of Romans, chapter 16, verse 11. Salute Herodian, my kinsman. He says he's a relative, a blood relative of Herod. Herodian and Herod are the same family. Can you believe this? He openly tells you, and your preachers say, oh, well, don't worry about that. He's just kind of like a friend. Now, how about this? In the same verse, greet them that be of the household of Narcissus. I always thought Narcissus was a bad terminology. People that are totally involved in themselves, totally, out to please themselves, and yet greet them that be the household of Narcissus. Wow. That doesn't seem like somebody that, is following the Christ is going to say, hey, let's go ahead and do this. Man, this is great. No. Let's go back to another verse in chapter 15 and read the whole verse to you. I read part of it earlier. Yea, so I have strived to preach the gospel, not where Christ was named, lest I should build upon another man's foundation. He calls the Christ just a man. And he does not want to build upon the Christ foundation. It's in black and white. I'm not making this up. It's there, but people, they don't want to go study. Because you know what happens when you start talking the truth about Paul? People start persecuting you. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know what happened. You have to decide whether or not you want to follow the Christ or you want to follow Paul. Paul said, "For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles. I magnify mine office." And we've been told all of our lives that, hey, if you ain't Jewish, you must be a Gentile. Well, excuse me, folks, why don't you do a lot of research in your Bible and find out that the Gentiles are called the heathen? And Paul admits to you that he's the apostle of the Gentiles. And it goes on. "If by any means I may provoke to emulate them which are my flesh," and might save some of them. So you can't save the heathen. And he comes up with this thing that we can be grafted in. Where does the Christ ever say that the Canaanites can be grafted in? Somebody please point that verse out to me, where the Christ says, let's go ahead and graft in the Canaanites. He clearly says that the Pharisees shall never enter into the kingdom. How is that? How about this part here when people start talking about and they say, well, we got to pay our taxes because Paul says to listen and to obey our magistrates and our principalities. He doesn't say obey them if they're correct in the Father's law. He says just obey them. That's how we get into problems, folks. Because the preachers are telling you that you're not under the law, but you're under grace. And that the free gift came upon all men. The Christ says very clearly that he comes for none others, but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He doesn't say that all get into heaven. We have to continuously work and do research. And you have to read these verses and say, what do they say? Are there a whole bunch of them that are, golly, I can't figure them out. They just keep, they says this, says that, says that. Are there contradictions with the Christ word? If there are contradictions, who should we believe? Now let's go to something very simple. Let's go to the book of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 15. And the Christ said to Peter, "But whom say ye that I am?" Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." He did not say, Peter did not say, "Thou art the Jesus Christ." He said, "the Christ." Paul constantly says, Jesus Christ. That's not what Peter said. And when we look at 1st and 2nd Peter, we then find that Peter is saying Jesus Christ. When he's in front of Christ, he says, "Thou art the Christ." Then later when he stretched forth his hands, it's Jesus Christ, not the Christ. People say, "Oh, well, you're just talking about something. You're making something up." No. When you're reading for content, you have to see what is said. And this is a mistake. This is an error that Peter made. And it's there for us to see. Anyway, I would be curious.
Once I get you up there.
Well, we got a radio break here, so come on back.